Obviously, as my guest here, Dustin Hogan, founder of Therapy for Dudes, a men's mental health and counselor based in Calgary. But what makes this conversation really unique and what I'm really excited to have this conversation with you is that you used to work right here at Safer Schools Together as a threat analyst and trainer. And earlier last year in 2025, you put out this amazing TEDx talk that shared a story about, what you call basically the silent crisis of mental health. And, you talk about this situation where you were staring at the mirror 1 a.m. in the morning, and that's kind of where that rock bottom was. And we share a very unique kind of connection to that story as, you started as a threat analyst and trainer in obviously Vancouver growing up, coming up in this area. So obviously starting at Safer Schools Together, kind of what was the experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite the experience. I mean, as somebody that really had no background in threat analysis, in the school system, the way that you guys work so incredibly. I mean, it was like drinking from a fire hose at times,
Mm-hmm.
in a good way. And I brought my kind of stage experience and experience as a public speaker and a trainer. So, it was a fairly easy transition as far as getting up on stage, but then learning the content and being able to speak about it truthfully and authentically. Definitely at times was challenging. But with that said, support from you and so many of the other amazing people on the team made it easier. But yeah, of course, there were times where it was very challenging. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I talked about it in my TEDx talk, and I'm sure we'll go much deeper into that today.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think one of the points that gets glamorized a lot in this type of work is this idea of you get to travel for work. And that's is something that people look, oh, what a cool thing to do, what a cool thing to see. And obviously, both of us have that experience of getting to see cool places, meet some really cool people. But also there's a flip side to that. And what was kind of your experience being able to travel and kind of almost really battling the things you were battling at the time?
hmm So, as somebody that defaults to more of an anxious way of thinking, it was a double edged sword because, yes, traveling, seeing new places, meeting new people, there's an excitement to that. There's a spontaneity to that. But there's also a massive lack of control that comes from that. And because I tend to default to more of an anxious way of living, going into situations where I didn't have all of the details all of the time, just because that's the nature of a new school, sometimes multiple schools in a day. It tended to build up for me just this like uncertainty and the unknown, which really pushed me to my limits a lot of the time. And then just the sheer volume. I mean, there are some weeks, I look back at my schedule here recently before our chat today. I mean, I think the biggest week I had was like 20, 25 presentations in a single week. And the biggest day, I think it was like 6 or 7 presentations. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a lot. It's a lot of energy to bring. And, for me, as somebody that enjoys being on stage and enjoys the entertainment aspect of it, being on, as you know, in front of 10 students to 1,000 students, like it requires a certain amount of energy, mentally, emotionally, physically. And I think for me, that rock bottom moment, it kind of came to a head where I was putting so much into it because that's my nature. I think for all of us as high performers, that's the nature of reality, but it can only go so far. And then you bring in the travel component, different bed, where am I going to be this night or that night? It all kind of came to a head. And then, especially in this case, with the amazing work that Safer Schools Together does, the content,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not talking about, it's not motivational, inspirational content we're delivering on stage. Like, it's very real, important topics at such a deep level. And I think for me, that really started to impact me at an emotional level that I didn't have the tools to be able to deal with at the time. And also felt like I needed to show up a certain way. Just me creating that reality. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, nobody told me that, but feeling like I needed to show up holding everything together when internally, day after day after day, things were crumbling. And yeah, man, I mean, I think back to that night, that moment. I mean, we were in we were in Regina actually, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember being in the hotel, and it was one of the lowest, darkest moments of my life for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, obviously to see what has come of that, I think is just so incredibly important and fantastic to see what you've built from that. And I think a lot of people can really, really resonate with this idea is that I have to show up looking and acting and behaving a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, people may think something's wrong. People may think, this is something isn't going right. What's happening? And that's a big aspect of that in that training world, because in that idea of presenting and public speaking, you can't show up just not looking at anybody, or just having
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard. It is really hard to push that back. And the glamorized lifestyle that it gets is exactly like, what hotel bed am I going to sleep in tonight? Where am I going to go get my next meal? What am I going to order from, or DoorDash or Uber Eats? One of my recent trainings, I was in a small rural town in America, and the only, like, I really just wanted a piece of meat, some vegetables, and mashed potatoes. That's really what
Yeah.
I was just craving, because it was, again, like the last day of a very long leg of trainings, and like the only thing that was available was like a Chick-fil-A. And I'm like, oh my God, again with this.
Yeah.
All those things stack up for sure. And it is a really, really tough. And to your point, the content that we speak about, that we talk about, is real. It is
Mm-hmm.
very concerning, and there needs to be that space to just kind of step back from it and be able to focus on what you need to focus on. But I mean, even before Safer Schools Together, even before all of this, I know that in your talk and what you said, that these were things that you were struggling with for a long time. And I think what's really, really important about just the recognition, right? A lot of young men, even everybody in their, is people in their adult age, may not even realize that they're struggling. They just kind of feel off. So kind of in your practice in therapy for dudes, right? How does someone know what they're experiencing has crossed from normal stress to something that they should actually address?
Mm. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, of course, it's going to be different for every guy that I talk to, but a lot of the times, people aren't reaching out to me in their best moments, and so often I'll wake up in the morning and there'll be emails that have been sent at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Like, people are hitting these moments where it's like, man, something's off here. And often I find, especially for guys, one of the things that stands out is, they felt like something's off for some time, but all of a sudden, they have an argument at home with their spouse. Things aren't progressing at work the way that they want them to be. They're struggling with their kids. So something external needs to be this trigger point of like, oh man, something is going off here, or is off in my system. Can't necessarily put my finger on it, but that is often the trigger point for so many guys who end up reaching out to me, is like, something externally has happened, either an argument, a disagreement, whatever it might be, to say, okay, I really need to look into myself and figure out what's going on, because they don't want to show up that way. They want to be the best version of themselves. They want to be a better man. But how are they defining that? Well, they're defining that by things externally maybe not going according to plan, and recognizing, okay, maybe there's some deeper inner work that I need to explore here with someone like myself, or another counselor, or another therapist.
Hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. And I think one of the other things, again, with that TED talk that you gave, I mean, incredibly powerful. I just looked at it. I think it's almost at like 350,000 views, which is so cool to
Yeah,
see
thanks, man.
that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just so curious, just from the behind the scenes side of things, what was it like preparing for that TEDx talk? And it's such a, obviously, a personal story to share on stage like that. Kind of, what's the process of deciding what to share and how to share it?
Well, my rehearsal spreadsheet will say that I rehearsed it 74 times before I actually got on stage there. I like to track these things just like I did when I was at SST and even now in my business. Like I like the data of things. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was quite the journey. It was almost like this talk that I felt like I'd been writing for the last decade, and then finally got to give it last, January 10th in Vancouver. But even just the process of putting the ideas together, feeling like I had so much that I wanted to share, but what should I share? How personal should I get? How much of my story should be in it? Knowing that, my friends were going to be there, my family was there, my parents flew in, my sister flew in for that talk, and there were certain components of that talk where, sure, they had an idea of my journey to a degree over the years, but there's certain things that afterwards created some conversations of like, oh man, I didn't know that you experienced that. So that was difficult for me. Also, on the day of, I was the first speaker to start the event, which was exciting and also terrifying at the same time. Of I want to set the precedence here
Yeah.
of the talks for the day. They haven't listened to anybody else speak, so it was like a different energy that I need to bring. Also, the other interesting thing that I learned throughout that process, because I came to Vancouver a week before the talk, so we practiced with all of the other speakers and in the venue and stuff like that, is the talk isn't actually for the live audience. The talk is for the virtual audience on YouTube. So
Mm.
where typically, I would play off of the kind of the energy of the space,
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily translate through a YouTube video. So
Yeah.
really it's about speaking to that audience worldwide that's going to listen to it, not necessarily for that few hundred people that were there that day. So that was an interesting kind of change of pace for me as somebody that likes that interaction with the crowd. So there were a lot of things going on. On the first 30 seconds, a baby started crying as well in the audience. And so I was like, okay, just stay focused, remember your lines.
Hmm.
Uh,
You think
so it
they
was
did that
quite
on
the,
purpose?
but potentially, yeah, yeah. The universe was doing something to me
Yeah.
there. But really, it came down to actually more so what I had to edit out of the talk, because it's not there for 2 hours. It's like 10
Yeah.
to 15 minutes. Mine's 15 minutes, pretty much to the second.
Hmm.
So it's like editing it down to the components that make sense across that journey. But yeah, it was amazing, man. One of the coolest
Yeah.
experiences that I've had.
Absolutely. And most people think that, oh my gosh, you have to stand up there and talk for 15 minutes straight. No, it is truly like, how can I get all of this in only 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to cut and things like that. And I'm sure, obviously COVID and remote and all of these things, we experience the same thing. A lot of our trainers prefer to be in person and feed off that audience. I think I'm one of
Hmm.
the few that actually prefer to be behind the screen, behind a camera, because that's just kind of where I feel the most comfortable. But you really have to be you have to be the energy that to feed off
Hmm.
yourself, essentially, for that. So I can definitely see where that's like a weird thing to try to, you know, to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
it was one thing where it was like a word for word memorization and delivery of it. Where other talks and presentations, you've got that flexibility, but this was, yeah, the intention was to learn it word for word. Hence the 74 rehearsals.
Yeah, and obviously such a huge impactful job. And I think one of the great things about sharing a personal story is that it really truly makes others who listen to that understand that, oh my gosh, I am not alone. Like, I have felt the exact same way. And being able to be that person who says, yeah, I know, I was there, I found that, like, I experienced the same things you experience. I think there is this sense of isolation that a lot of men may have
Hmm.
when they're experiencing some of these things. So can you talk about, just generally, what is kind of that internal dialogue when they're feeling some of these things? What maybe the actual thoughts that are running through a guy's head that may keep him from reaching out?
Yeah, another really good question. And even just speaking from my journey of those days where I felt at the lowest of If I do reach out, I'm going to be perceived as weak or less of a man or not as strong as people think that I am, or worse yet, something's wrong with me or I'm broken. And I think as men, we default, for better or for worse, to problem solver mode, to fix it mode. So when something's perceiving wrong or we're perceiving something's wrong, we're trying to fix it on our own, which to a degree is helpful, but a lot of the times it's actually counterproductive, because trying to figure these things out on our own actually just perpetuates the cycle. And like, even back to that night, staring in the mirror, feeling like completely alone, I mean, that's the mind telling us that. I could have reached out to anybody that night, on our team, and it would have had support. I could have reached out to friends. I could have reached out to family to support me through that. Yet as men, we default to, I need to figure this out on my own.
Yeah.
Because if I don't, somehow that means something's wrong with me or I'm broken. That's a thought that has coursed through my mind so many times over the years, especially at those low moments of like, man, something is really wrong with me here.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
I think there's something that I want to kind of talk about that I don't think we can really ignore at this point. And when somebody who is feeling that way, obviously the first thing that they're probably going to do is grab the phone, their device, and search things. And there's a big culture out there of quote unquote toxic masculinity, manosphere, incel culture, all of it, right? You work with the exact demographic that's being targeted. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on these groups and why they're vulnerable essentially to this potential messaging, because I've got a lot that I want to go into with these types of
Mm-hmm.
groups, but I'm so curious to see, like, how much of that do you see in your practice, this idea of this red pill, black pill, these myths that that are brought up in these groups and communities.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, in thinking about today's conversation and thinking about this part of it, that was something that I was pondering. And I mean, it certainly shows up on a fairly regular basis for me, but I think kind of the idea or the question of like, what does it mean to be a man, probably shows up on a more regular basis
Hmm.
of who am I in the world as a man, and what does that mean, and what is even the definition of it these days? Is it that more kind of toxic? And I mean, that's even a term that's just thrown around quite
Absolutely.
loosely these days. Is it that side, or is it the ultimate kind of connecting into the emotional part of who we are, like kind of like even like a mountain man version of who we're supposed to be, or is it somewhere in the middle? And I think certainly maybe for some younger guys that I work with that do spend more time on their devices, or perhaps more influenced by some of that messaging just because it is more front and center. Some of the more middle-aged men that I work with, maybe not as much, because they're not on their devices as much as some of the younger guys are. But I think
Mhm.
what ends up happening is, and even for myself, man, it's like linking on to certain messages that is like, okay, yeah, there's maybe some sort of truth in that. And then as we know, the algorithm just starts to do its thing. And then, the inbox is flooded and we think that that's reality, but that's just reality through the lens that I'm looking through. So
Yeah.
I think these conversations around what it means to be a man, how we're defining that, what masculinity actually means, to me, that's a more important conversation to have, because the definition is going to be a little bit different for everybody.
100%. And what, because obviously we work with youth, our ideas youth, K-12, but even into some of those higher ed pieces, and you know some of the things that the research again looks into is this idea of suicidality and homicide as well. Like, again, this is very much into the weeds, but it's a reality, right? Again, we in our work we do look at the worst of the worst. Um but one of the big things, kind of this idea that we look at when we're looking at someone who's extremely high risk, is this idea of fluidity, which is somebody who is shifting between thoughts of wanting to harm self and wanting to harm others. And in most of our high risk cases, those killers did experience thoughts of that they were fluid, right? They did have both of those thoughts. And one of the things, again, we look at in some of the aftermath is search history. So we know that there's a lot of inordinate knowledge about past attacks, past killers, but there's other elements here too. And, a big part of where this conversation really stemmed from, or started at least, where we started to talk about it at SST a lot more, was this Netflix show, Adolescence.
Mm.
Did you see it at all?
I saw one episode, I believe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting because it touches a little bit on this idea of these toxic masculinity groups, the manosphere. I don't think it did it in a way that was true to reality. Our work obviously looks at the evolution along a pathway to violence and what really
Mm-hmm.
led someone to actually engage in a targeted act of violence. Nobody just snaps. Nobody goes to bed a healthy individual one day, wakes up the next, and decides to commit an act of violence. But we know that it started to spark a lot of conversation. And really where this stemmed from us is that a young guy's struggling. They're rejected. They feel isolated. They don't have a clear future, right? It's very interesting in the research that talks about who are these individuals who are potentially likely to commit an act of violence or, again, experience those thoughts. And you hear this idea of a loner who's isolated, someone who just,
Mm-hmm.
and those necessarily aren't the individuals that we're the most concerned about, because if they're choosing to really be alone, that's one thing. But it's this idea of a failed joiner. Those are the ones that we're concerned about. So if you've got someone who is rejected, isolated, no clear future for what they perceive anyway, what I find truly concerning is that these groups, again, I'm labeling the toxic masculinity idea as a very generalized term,
Yeah.
because right now they're the only groups that I see online who meet these guys where they're at. They're the only ones to say, yeah, your life does suck, but I've got the tools to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets really tough, because some of those ideas, again, to this idea of what it means to be a man, latching onto those things, those are things that impressionable young men can latch onto. But what's underneath is this whole idea of this just not, um, the true toxic masculinity, right? Misogynistic behaviors, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we really see, in especially some of these young men. So again, your point about what that truly means to be a man, they may come to this conversation with this idea of what it is already built up from what they've seen online. So it becomes a very, very challenging topic, obviously, when it gets labeled as that, because what I find personally, and again, I share no values with these individuals,
Yeah.
just to put that out there. But what I also see happen is that because these groups are so vilified, then that almost makes individuals double down on that type of
Mm-hmm.
messaging and feel that type of way. So, and the main reason for my question was just to see how much of that comes up in the practice, and is it with a specific age range, or is it with just generalized that you see a lot of the times?
For sure. And once again, another really good question. And I'll maybe speak to this from a bit of a different angle, because I think, and you kind of spoke about it there, as I think those young men that do latch on to that type of information or content, they are looking for guidance in a way, right? They're looking for mentorship. They're looking for somebody to lead them. Like I know as myself, as a young man, like, of course there were people that supported me and mentored me. My dad, like is top of that list, and other people that have come into my life over the years. And so thankfully I had really good examples of what that meant. But for some of these younger men that are latching onto this, to me, that's what they're looking for. Their leadership, guidance, mentorship in some way. It just so happens, right? They come across this content, some of it resonates, and then, before you know it, obviously things go in the direction that they are. And so I think that's an important piece to keep in mind. And it's the way that I've approached my work, maybe almost like indirectly, to fight against that. Of
Hmm.
when I do have younger men reaching out to me, although it's a counseling and it's a therapeutic relationship, there is almost this like big brother mentorship vibe to it, where
Sure.
they've connected to me in some sort of a way. They're looking to grow their life in some sort of capacity. And so I've taken on this role, whether or not I realize it or not, and I've come to realize it over especially the last year and a bit here, is there is that mentorship and guidance component to it, even though that's not what counseling and therapy is. Naturally, that just ends up happening if a 20-year-old reaches out to me to start working with me. And so part of, I guess, the way I'm trying to kind of combat the toxic masculinity is like, okay, if there are guys, younger guys that want to work with me that are looking up to me in some sort of a way, I've got to model this behavior for them in the best way that I can. And part of that, and part of my intention, even putting that TEDx talk out there, is I need to be open and transparent in this way. So somebody hears this message and say, man, I'm not as alone as I thought, because this guy who's on this stage, who seemingly has it all together, which none of us do, we're all a work in progress, has gone through this as well. So modeling that behavior is part of my role in all of this. And I also think that, one-on-one conversations is then going to allow that young man to go out and positively impact his family, his friends, and it becomes this exponential positive ripple effect that happens from the one-on-one work that I do. But then even in conversations like this, man, like, who knows who's going to listen to this at some point, and the impact that that's going to have on them. So I know that's maybe not directly answering your question, but that's the way that I've thought of it, because there's a lot of negativity online, man. Yeah. And, if we push back against that, that certainly is a strategy. But the famous quote, "What you resist persists," often amplifies some of those messages. So it's like, how can I take an approach that's 180-degree difference from that, but is still going to make a positive impact? That's the way that I look at it in my work. And I'll also say this, one of the other things, especially in the last couple of years here, that's given me some hope. A lot of younger men have reached out to me in that early 20s kind of range. They're now working, they've got some benefits that they want to use, and they want to be proactive with their mental health. Whereas many of the other guys my age, early 30s, I'm not early 30s, I'm early 40s, but, early 30s, mid 40s, it's more reactive. So the fact that younger guys are reaching out to me more proactively actually gives me hope for the future, that if these guys are building those types of tools, that they're going to then share with their friends, their partners, their, family, it's going to create this positive ripple effect that actually starts to diminish those other more negative messages that are out there.
Yeah. And I think that's another kind of reason why I was so excited to have this conversation, because there are other groups, there are other true groups and communities out there that are focused on the right path. And, I want to use this platform to be able to say to anybody who may be listening to this and share whatever, that there are true groups out there that are working for men's mental health, that aren't, these hucksters, these people who are trying to sell you a program to make all this money and all these things. That's just like, that's not the answer, right? There are other answers out there. And unfortunately, those voices are the ones that get the most attention, get the most, scrolls, clicks, likes, all those things, which does really end up on the algorithm on that For You page. So, my question, one of the next questions I had was kind of how you dispel some of those rumors and those myths through your work, but you really did kind of answer it with the one-on-one questions and understanding that there's a whole other side to this idea of men's mental health, not just what you see online.
Totally. And I mean, as cliche as it is like being that change that we want to see in the world. To me, that's the best way to amplify these more positive messages, is just showing up to the best of my ability. Of course, many days are still a struggle, but like showing up and modeling that behavior the same way that it was modeled to me by the men in my life that I respect and that I love and that are really leading their lives with virtue. And it's interesting, I'm reading a book right now as part of my book club. I started a book club with some of my best buddies, Club for Dudes. we're like 35, almost 40 books into it. And it's been incredible, man. It's been an incredible way to connect with guys that I've known for 20, 30 years and talk
Mm-hmm.
about different topics. But we're reading a book right now, just finishing it up because we meet on Friday, called How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. It's all about stoicism. And, stoicism, as men, is something that a lot of guys default to. And I've known a little bit about it, but this is my first real dive into it. But one of the things that really stands out to me about this is this idea of like showing up as a man of character and virtue, and really embodying these characteristics and these behaviors without needing to shout it from the rooftops, of just like showing up as a better version of ourselves, showing up as a better man. And as I've been reading this book, it's made me think back to witnessing my dad over the last 43 years of my life, and the way that he shows up as sometimes a strong, silent type, as a leader, and really embodying these characteristics of integrity, of kindness, of strength from a real deep level. So to me, that's the way we combat these maybe negative parts of the world, certainly negative parts of the internet, by showing up as almost like the polar opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And some really great points that you threw in there is having the connections, the strong, healthy connections. I mean, the family connections are absolutely huge. And I think that's a really, really important part that we look for, obviously, in the work when we're trying to identify what's going on with a potential young person. Like, what are the good things going on? Who can they connect to in person? That's going to be, can be part of that work, part of that process, right? That anchor for them to latch onto. So it even sounds like you yourself have become that positive anchor for a lot of these struggling individuals. And, obviously I think you're more unk than big bro now, I'm sorry to say.
There you go. Yeah, the gray hairs. Thanks for pointing them out. Yeah.
That's all the lingo that they use now. But yeah, so again, the Roman emperor, is that like the Marcus Aurelius type situations in his
so
teachings?
it's exactly what it talks about, is his life of becoming a Roman emperor, and just what led him to that, and the mentorship that he had, and how he was taught stoicism, but then how he lived it and embodied it throughout his life. So it's been brilliant, man. It's been a brilliant read.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that book club. We do a group of my friends, we do a music club, so just music albums we get together on a weekly basis. So that's a little less commitment than a full book, but it's still good. Are they all nonfiction you guys read?
No, so I'm the guy that brings nonfiction into the group. So,
kind groan every time. It's like
groans from the other guy. Yeah, I brought attached a relationship book into it last year, the year before, and got some groans from that. But that's the thing is, there's a number of us in the group, and when it's your choice or your turn to choose, whatever book you bring, everybody's got to read it. So it forces you in a good way to read books that like I would never pick off the shelf, or they would never pick off the shelf. And if you like the book or not, it doesn't matter, because it creates great conversation between a group of guys. And of course we pair it with a night out and a restaurant, and, a little glass of wine here and there, but it just creates great conversations.
Yeah. It's a fun way to get out for sure. One of the things you talked about is that obviously men, a lot of our default status is the problem solving, fixing the steps. We got to do this. So let's say we go back to that someone who is struggling, who is suffering. What are those concrete steps that they should take if they are experiencing some of these things? And where does he even start? Struggling. He's never talked to anyone about this. Where does he start? What's step one?
I mean, step one, and I even talked about it in my talk, is reaching out. That is often the hardest step, especially for guys, to eventually say, I do need some help. And it could be reaching out, to somebody like me, a counselor or a therapist, could be a close friend, family member, but taking that step and saying, dude, like, I'm not okay, as scary as it is it's going to be such a positive step in the right direction. And the thing is to remember as well is sometimes when we do reach out, may not be met in the way that we want it to. So that's also a scary thought as well. Or if somebody does reach out to a therapist, the first person you reach out to might not be a good fit for you, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to work. It just means you got to try again and continue that process. So step number one is reaching out, and then just taking some action. I find that as well, sometimes as men, we feel like we need to scale the mountain in one giant step or one leap, but recognizing that it's like one day at a time. I mean, I said it earlier, but we're all a work in progress, me included. You know, I aim to be, my best testimonial is all of the skills, tools, and strategies I share with the guys that I work with. I'm using them on a daily basis as well. And I think also for men, when we do have that target that we're aiming for, of not trying to fix ourselves, because to me, none of us are broken to begin with, but moving forward and feeling like there's some progress or some sense of accomplishment, even if it's just tidying up my office, something that feels good and moves us in the right direction. I think for men especially is so important.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I really resonate with that because, like, for just kind of normal everyday things, that's like focusing on physical health and those things, again, are extremely important. And we try to take a lot of these tools on at once, which can sometimes lead to burnout or distrust in the system. And I think one of the things that's helped me kind of continue on, my own, is if I can be 1% better than the next day, right? Even if it's just a little bit better, to your point, like I'll make my bed this morning. I don't want to go to the gym, or I don't want to do this thing, but I'm going to at least go for half the time or even put in half the effort. And even then, it's still better than not doing whatever it is in those tools. So, I mean, to that point, that question, beyond formal therapy, what are some everyday things that do work? Not just go to the gym, bro, but what really helps move the needle?
Yeah, and I mean, physical health, I'd say, is an important piece of it, and I almost think of my gym routine more so for my mental and emotional health than physical. The physical is just like a nice benefit that comes from it. So some sort of physical movement. I think another key component for us guys is having a better understanding of what's actually going on for us emotionally. So many of us default to our cognitive, rational brain. Nothing wrong with that. It's a powerful tool, but it's not the only tool in the toolbox. Being able to articulate, being able to understand and accurately and precisely identify what's going on emotionally, and then being able to communicate that is such a powerful tool. And one of the simplest yet most powerful tools I share with clients is a simple feelings wheel. Being able to identify with accuracy and precision what's actually going on, and then sharing that is so valuable. And one of my clients says something that's kind of a cheesy line, but I love it. They say you got to name it to tame it, feel it to heal it. And by being able to identify what's going on for us as guys, there's so much value in that. So whether or not, if someone's in counseling or not, a quick Google search of feelings wheel or emotion wheel will bring up a whole host of examples to be able to download and just have it on your phone and just tune in to what's actually going on. So simple tools like that. I think we sometimes overcomplicate things or think it needs to be this 20-step plan, when really simple activities consistently practiced over time, kind of circling back to your 1% better every day. That's really what we're talking about.
Yeah. And you know what? It's just, I lit up when you said feelings wheel, because I remember looking at one a while ago and being like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of feelings to have. and it's right. Because again, a lot of us default to either happy, sad, angry, bad. Right. But that, I think that's just a lack of knowing that, well, I'm not feeling bad. I'm feeling pressured, or I'm feeling bitter, or I am resentful. Like those are much more accurate, and especially when it's kind of laid out. So 100%, being able to just stop and like when something has happened, like just taking stock of, well, I'm experiencing this right now, and not pushing it to the side or be like, I'll deal with this later, and those things. Being able to at least again, whatever we're doing at the end of the day, at least be able to put ourselves back in that situation and be like, okay, I was feeling this way. This is why. And also being able to communicate that appropriately and effectively is huge.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so you've obviously built Therapy for Dudes, a very specific targeted approach as a safe space for men. And what is it about that intentional focus that makes guys feel safe to open up?
I mean, I think from the name, I mean, just starting with the name, like it's very clear what I do and who I do it for. And it's an interesting space to be in, you know, like when I went back to school in kind of 2020 to go to back to school for counseling when I was still living in Vancouver. From day one, I knew that I wanted my practice to be focusing on men and men's mental health. You know, as somebody that's dealt with severe anxiety and depression for most of my life, as a guy feeling like I needed to show up a certain way, I recognized that there weren't as many spaces for us guys, especially from a therapeutic standpoint, that just caters to men. I mean, there's a lot of people that say they work with men or do men's work, other counselors and therapists, but it's like one of 10 bullet points on their website. But there's not a whole lot of male therapists out there. I mean, even my cohort was 70% women. And B, there's not a whole lot of people that just put their flag in the sand and say that this is who I work with. So, you know, I also noticed that there was an opportunity there to be able to have success in this space. And to me, I really define success as, you know, people impacted.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, when I launched the practice initially, from day one, it was all just focusing on men and men's mental health. And sure, there were a few people in my life that said, well, is that really a smart move? You're cutting out half the population.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, yeah, this is what needs to happen because there's not enough of these spaces. So for a lot of guys, you know, when I meet them on that initial discovery call, I can tell you on a daily basis, they'll say, man, there was something on your website that I read that spoke directly to me, or felt like you were speaking directly to me, because that's the intention with everything, is with what I'm doing here, is really just wanting to create a very specific space for us guys to be able to share things in ways that maybe they wouldn't with somebody else in the field. So it's been a lot of fun getting it to this point.
That's awesome. And yeah, no, to that point, I know that there's, again, a lot of what I'm seeing and taking is, again, from online spaces. So I know that this is not indicative of real life. But I also know that there are situations where men do reach out to someone and say, I'm struggling. And the answer, or the rebuttal to that question, is no, you're not, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not suffering. You're a man. You have male privilege. And it's a tough conversation because, yeah, there's a patriarchy. Yes, I've benefited from things from being a man, but it's the individual experience that I think is something that should be looked at, and why spaces like this are going to be extremely important. Because when, you know, men share this, sometimes there truly is pushback from individuals, and that can be extremely, again, push them back into that idea of isolation and failed joining and thinking that something, again, is still wrong.
Yeah.
Wasn't really a question,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Well, as you were sharing there, I mean, I think back to so many conversations that I have on a daily basis, and I mean, there's certain things that we're just more comfortable sharing with another dude, and that's just the reality of it. And a lot of guys have shared that to me. With that said, there's certain things that I'm more comfortable sharing with a female, and for me, even when I'm in the client's seat, I've worked with both male and female therapists over the years. You know, right now I'm working with a female therapist, and she's incredible. And, you know, there's things that I would say to her that maybe I'd be nervous to say to a dude. So I think there's opportunity for both areas to be successful. In this case, there's just, guys want to talk to another guy about guy stuff. And so I'm doing my best to create that space, one conversation at a time.
yeah. And you know what? That guy stuff is a really great conversation, because I'll go hang out with some of my friends, some of my buddies, and I'll get back home and my wife's asking like, oh, well, what about this person? Did you talk about that? Did you ask him about that? I'm like, no, what? I don't even think
Yeah.
we actually had a conversation. We just watched the game, you know? Um, but again, those are some really important things. So why do you think that men's friendships often lack emotional depth, and how how can we change that?
It's a good question, especially based on us chatting about the book club,
Mm-hmm.
because like I said, some of the, guys in the book club I've known since high school. So, date myself, graduated in 2000. So it was a few years ago, and best friends in the whole world. But yeah, eventually it gets to the point where you've had a lot of the conversations about things. So it just becomes maybe more surface level unless something's happening in that person's life. So bringing in something like, okay, we're going to talk about this book or a new book every month or 2 months, it creates that space and that opportunity to have more of an experiential hangout or a conversation. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's maybe what's lacking in some male friendships, where it results in that lack of depth, because it is just the same old, same old. So by switching things up and creating an opportunity for those deeper connections, I think it's very unassuming, and there's really no pressure. We're here to talk about this book, but then it opens up all of these other conversations. Well, why is your opinion this way versus mine?
Mm-hmm.
And like it just creates that space without putting too much pressure on it. So perhaps maybe for guys that are listening that are recognizing some of that lack of depth, switch things up, make some of the hangouts a bit more experiential, where it forces different types of conversation and brings up different parts of the relationship, rather than just the same old get together and watch the game. Of course there's space for that. I do that
Mm-hmm.
myself. But then because there's been these other experiences, it almost makes those experiences that much better, because now there's that layer of depth that
Yeah.
just makes it easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And this music club that I'm in, I feel like, a lot of those same things are happening because you share a very personal album because of the themes that it discusses, or, a lot of the situations that happened to this person that they decided to create a piece of art from. And you get everybody's reaction from that. And you get to, get their thoughts on why they didn't like it, why they did like it. And that just, it just helps break up the conversation. It's really interesting. And,
Exactly.
one of the albums that I'm yet to send out, but one of the times, it's a band called The Wonder Years. I'm very much a pop punk, emo type music guy. But I think the writing is really helpful, and it's really insightful because it talks about a father's perspective of being depressed and being, some sort of diagnosis, and worrying about the future, right? For their sons, for their children. And, for that experience, it's not something that I ever even thought about, right? Until, again, topic of kids conversation, eventually that'll happen. But what do you tell fathers who are worried about their sons, or guys who want to do better than what they had?
Yeah, and that's a big conversation, because I work with a lot of dads, and I'm not a dad myself at this point, so obviously can't connect to that from a
Mm,
very personal level. But the guys that I do have conversations with, going back to earlier parts in our chat here, man, is just like modeling that behavior and recognizing that they can only show up to their best of their ability. But if they're putting in that effort, then that's worth something. And, I've done some work with a really cool organization here in Calgary called Day One Dads. And it's just specifically focusing on men's mental health for dads. And a lot of those conversations at those events or those meetings is about like, yeah, how do I show up as that, best version of myself for my son? And hearing those conversations, it's like, yeah, only doing what they can with the tools that they have, maybe certain tools that they weren't given in the past from their fathers. So now they're developing those tools and those skills. And even going back to the whole feelings wheel piece, that's the way that I look at something like that. It's a skill that can be developed. And when we put in our reps, we get better at it. And then that information can be then shared. So those are the types of conversations that I do have with dads in sessions where they're feeling like they're struggling, is like, okay, just show up the best version of yourself, work on some of the tools and skills that maybe you weren't given as a young man. And then being able to share those with their son has been hugely beneficial, because then I have the benefit of seeing over time how things improve and how the relationship with their son improves as they're improving themselves. So yeah, it's been a joy to kind of see some of that growth with some of the dads that I work with.
That success must be just invaluable.
It's so cool, man. Yeah, it lights me up, because they're doing the heavy lifting, right? I'm just there to ask some questions and provide some insight and guidance from a tool and strategy standpoint, but they need to do the heavy lifting in their life, and I get to just be along for the ride and see the progress.
Well, I wouldn't diminish your role quite so much, because that foundation, I mean, where you started leaving and experiencing all that, I think is the reason why you've got the chops to be able to now, guide these people who are struggling, because you're not just the person who just, decides I'm going to do this, right? It comes from real, experiences. And I think that is really what people need and resonate with. And I think when we share our stories, when we're comfortable with the uncomfortable, that is where people can realize that, oh man, I'm not alone, and this is something that they can do. So last question, just for someone who's listening, maybe recognize themselves in this conversation or know someone who's struggling, what's the one thing you want them to walk away remembering?
Yeah, just gonna kind of sit with that for a second. Yeah, kind of going back to what we said a little while ago, is remember that it's okay to reach out, and especially as men, that if and when you do reach out, it doesn't mean you're weak, it doesn't mean you're broken. It actually shows a hell of a lot of courage and a lot of strength. And it took me a lot of years to realize that. And quite frankly, it's a lesson that I'm still learning. I notice myself defaulting to patterns of, okay, I'm just going to fix myself. I'm going to figure things out on my own. But every time, 100% of the time, when I do reach out to my parents or my sister or my friends or whomever, it's always beneficial. So if you take away one thing from our conversation today, is reach out if you need to. It doesn't mean you're weak or broken. It actually shows a heck of a lot of strength.
Awesome. Well, Dustin, if people do want to reach out, where can they find you?
Yeah, so online, therapyfordudes.com is my website. On Instagram, I am Dustin Hogan. And of course, on YouTube with my TEDx talk, The Silent Crisis of Men's Mental Health. If you just type in Dustin Hogan, it will pop up.
Awesome. Well, we'll link all that in the show notes for everybody if they do need something, if they do need support, anything like that. Yeah, a really important message. It is okay to reach out, and it does show that strength. So Dustin, amazing conversation. It's really good to see you online. Hopefully we get to see you in person soon, but thanks so much for the conversation.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. It was great to see you again.
Always.